Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We are actually reviving a long dormant series called Chess Books Recaptured, where we occasionally get together with a friend of a pod and talk about a chess book. It's been a while, so I hope I remember how to do this. So if you enjoy this format, you can check out the archives. We talk about some 30 plus books, but it's been close to a year since we've done this. This one we're going to do a little bit differently. Time evolves. You know, they keep having these new tools. Now there's this thing called video and YouTube. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a shorter conversation about the book with our guest, who I'll introduce in a minute. And then this book, and it's also a Chessable course, I felt like was particularly visually oriented. So we're also going to do a YouTube video where we show some of our favorite positions and tease some other stuff. So this you could consider part one, which is going to be fully suitable for audio only. And then for those interested in seeing some of the positions from the book we're going to discuss, which is 100 Tactical Patterns You Must Know, then you can tune in on YouTube. As for our guest this week, he is a returning book recapper. He's also a great chess podcaster, the host of the Chess Journeys podcast. Those of you who are into the Adult Improver series here on Perpetual Chess, well, guess what? Kevin interviews adult amateurs every week, and it's always an engaging conversation. He's also a teacher, a dad, and now a Chessable author, the author of Chess Journeys Tactics Workbook, Turning Tactics into Skill. So without further ado, let's welcome back to Perpetual Chess, Kevin Skull. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having me. I hadn't realized that my favorite episodes were dormant. I just figured I somehow missed the last couple book reviews.
Yeah, it's been a while. I didn't check when the last one was, but as I've, people who did hear them would hear me lament. They take the most work and receive the fewest listens. I heard a statistic that something like 48% of Americans have read a book in the past year. So when you do a podcast about a book, you're like niche within niche within niche or something. So doesn't get all the clicks, but I still love books. So even though this project has slowed down, I have no plans of abandoning it entirely. And this, of course, was your idea, Kevin. So 100 Tactical Patterns You Must Know, relatively new book from New in Chess by FIDE master Frank Ervig. What, Kevin, drew you to this book?
As an adult improver, I feel like we're all about structure and like being able to categorize our knowledge to be able to more easily get at it. I think it's why books like 100 Endgames You Must Know is popular. And I just hadn't seen a book break down so many tactical patterns in such a specific way. You see books that are like, here's the pins, here's the forks, and this goes so deep into all the different types and names them. And I just feel like almost immediately this goes in my upper echelon of chess books. I really kind of feel like if you haven't read this, you're at a disadvantage now. Everyone else knows 100 tactical patterns by heart, and you're like, what? I don't know these patterns. So I don't know. It feels like almost a must read at this point.
Yeah, further, I mean, you must know them. It's not optional, Kevin.
Yeah.
I mean, the title says it. But okay, I mean, you said what's good about the book, and I agree, just to avoid burying the lead. I'm a big fan of this book, not going to lie, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But did you know that going in, or did you just pick it up kind of on spec?
I mean, the title alone is just like, that's obviously something I want. Unless it's bad, then
Right.
It's going to be great, right? Like no one's done this yet. It felt like a huge hole in the market. Like as soon as I saw the title, I was like, wait, why hasn't someone done this already? Like,
Right.
This is madness that we've got like 100,000 chess books and this one hasn't been made.
Yeah, and that's why when you said it, I've been busy. Like I said, some of these books, I read a lot of books for the authors that I interview. So to read another book on top of that, to do a recap, it had to be one that grabbed me. And when you said that, I felt the same way. Of course, it's been recommended when I interviewed Grandmaster Jakob Aagaard about the acquisition by Quality Chess of New in Chess, among other things. He went out of his way to praise this book in particular, highlighting some of the same points you did, saying like, why didn't I think of that? And, Elizabeth Spiegel, who's a renowned teacher here, the teacher in the movie Brooklyn Castle. For those of you who have not seen that documentary, you should check it out. Legendary teacher Elizabeth Spiegel at some point posted on Facebook, this is my new favorite book. Although either a week before or a week after that, she also posted that about Dream Moves by Moran Sher. So she finds different favorite books, but still it's an incredibly high praise from Elizabeth. So for that reason, it didn't require as much arm twisting as usual, and I picked up the book. Now, just to share a few details that I got from Ramel Otten of New in Chess, the backstory of this book is similar to what you said. They said, hey, 100 100 Endgames You Must Know is a huge hit. Maybe we should try to make another huge hit. And they reached out to Frank Ervig, who's like 2400 rated FIDE master, very strong FIDE master in the Netherlands. He's also a top trainer, works with Dutch national teams, and he'd done some successful tactical books for New in Chess. So they signed him up, and yeah, it's another hit. So what else so as you dug in, you were into it right away, Kevin?
Yeah, chapter 1 is really fantastic, right? It was like a couple patterns that I was thinking, yes, this is a critical pattern that I know. I just hadn't named it this. And then some other cool patterns, like the long castle double check. I was just like, oh, yeah, how come I don't know this pattern? And then the flashcards at the end of the chapter to be like, hey, just in case you forgot, here they all are in a nice, concise package. I was just kind of like, okay, you got me. You got me. This is a great book.
Yeah, brilliantly done. Just did want to quickly mention for anyone wondering, I would say the target audience, to my mind, is probably 1400 plus. 1400 to 2000-ish is probably like the absolute sweet spot. But there were some patterns I had never seen before. And one thing that's really cool about the book is he's really good about finding different permutations. So it's like, even if you've seen a pattern before, and then he'd be like, oh, but here's this example where it doesn't actually work. And as you mentioned, the naming of the patterns is such an important concept. He tells a nice the book is very light on prose, we should say. I mean, there's good annotations of the positions presented, but not a lot of prose. But he does tell a story in the introduction of like falling for a certain checkmate when he was a Scholastic player, and then seeing a very similar pattern in like an Anish Giri game some years later and saying like, yeah, I know that because, yeah, once you fall for one of those patterns, what's the Mark Twain quote about grabbing a cat by its tail? Like you learn something that you can't learn any other way. I think it works that way with being on the business end of chess patterns as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I have only one quibble, but I understand, Kevin, despite your praise for it, you do have a couple quibbles with it.
Yeah, I think my biggest one is what you said you liked. Like, for me, as you know, if the target audience is like 1400 to 2000, I feel like this is aimed at the amateur player who needs to categorize these, right? So I would assume that the way the book would be laid out is like, here's the pattern. Here are 3 examples that are kind of basic, showing you the pattern. And here's maybe a more advanced one. But instead, the book is kind of like, here's a pattern that lays it out. And then it gets very complicated very fast.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
Like, I'll be like, here's where it doesn't work. But here's where it doesn't work, but then it works. And then the refutation is the counter refutation, the refutation. And you're just like, wait, hold on. I don't even have this pattern down yet. What are we doing?
Yeah.
So I think for that lower level, like maybe 1400 to 1800, I think it gets quickly overwhelming. I was curious if you at 2200 would be like, no, I love that. That's where I was able to learn. And so I feel like there's a bit of an identity crisis in like the book feels aimed at a 1400 audience, but the examples are for like very quickly 2000 plus. And so it's kind of
I didn't think of that. Yeah, I didn't think of that, but that's totally a valid point. I mean, the thing I would say that my perspective was as I read it was, I mean, first of all, we should say, and we'll show this in the YouTube video, there's some really cool examples. So I want to give the author credit for that. But the other thing is that to me, it's like the value is in naming it, you know, like in How to Beat Your Dad at Chess, you know, he shows these patterns and then they kind of bat you over the head with them. Now, I guess you do need, for a more beginner-oriented book like that, which that one certainly is, you do want to repeat it and see it with like slight tweaks. But for this, I felt like, at least to me, the primary value of the book is having a name for it. And the fact that he did, as you mentioned, it proceed to very complicated refutations, and like maybe the pattern would emerge a few moves down the line. But I mean, the names are just so creative. The rampant rook in those situations where you have a rook where like your king is stalemated and you have like the rook chasing the king all over the board, and if it gets taken, it's stalemate. Like, I'd never heard the rampant rook. That's an amazing term for it that like I'll never forget. You know, some of them are more familiar, like the windmill, the bishop and back rank clearance, cross pins. There's one called the Maltese cross. Sounds like, you know, a jujitsu move or something like that. So, of course, when you're naming 100 patterns, some of them are going to be a little more forced than others. But overall, I was really impressed with the naming of the patterns and felt like that was the primary value to me. But I get what you're saying. It would kind of be a different book if they did it that way, but I don't to me, it would just be kind of 6 in one, half dozen in the other.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to add on to it, like he has the thing on the Greek gift, right? And I imagine most of your listeners are like, okay, yeah, I know that one. But his Greek gift is like a 17 move sequence for the
Right.
first example. And I was like, what are we doing? Who is this targeted at? So that's where it became like for a lot of these chapters, I would see the name and I'd be like, awesome name, cool, that's the pattern. I would do like 2 examples and then they would quickly be beyond me, and I'd be like, okay, I guess I'm skipping to the next pattern. Which I don't know, it just felt weird because it feels like this book is aimed at a lower audience than most of the examples.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. But again, to me, it's like if you're rated 1400, you have a name,
Yeah.
um, and you can go from there. Now, one thing I want to ask you about in a second, though, is you spent a lot more time with the workbook than I
Mhm.
did. But the only other thing I would give as a quibble, and this is kind of nitpicky, but just like it's a little too cute. It's a little too perfect. 100 patterns. There's going to be exactly 100, you know?
Yeah.
And towards the end, I did kind of see that because that's when like the Greek
Yep.
gift comes in and he's doing a few more checkmates when I believe they have a 100 checkmate patterns. There certainly are checkmate pattern book. So the main idea of the book is not for these to be checkmating patterns, but to get to 100, you know, you might need to throw in a few things that you would also see in other sources. But to me, that's a very minor quibble. But the point about like who is the audience, if true, is a very important one. So it does get segue nicely, Kevin, to what your thoughts of the workbook are and like how whether it has the same issues in terms of what audience it's is or isn't addressing.
Yeah, so the workbook is very interesting because the first, like, let's say there's 12 patterns in a chapter. The first 12 patterns are the basic patterns just mixed up. And so that's perfect, right? And then it's like 12 more patterns that are like the next step. But like the examples, it quickly like gets out of control, and you're like, okay, all right. So I would do like the first 20 of each workbook chapter and then be like, okay, now the rest is not for me. Which again, I feel like it does two things, right? One, it's trying to engage a wider range of players, which is a good thing. But then on the other end, it's like, I don't know, are like thousands and 2200s really buying this book to learn the 100 patterns? Or are they looking at this book and going, of course, I already know those patterns. I'm not getting that book. So I don't know if he's actually teaching 2200s, then I think all that material is really necessary. But if he's not, then maybe it's not.
Well, as a lapsed 2200, I mean, there's definitely plenty I could learn from the book, like some of its review. But again, like to me, the nuts and bolts of the complex variations, like that, they were kind of incidental to the broader point of the book. But I get what you're saying. I mean, you're investing a lot of time. If you get the workbook too, you're spending twice the amount of money. So you want to feel like you're getting a good ROI. But again, to me, it was like just the names and the overall structure was good too. Like it's organized into chapters. Kevin mentioned the little what they call flashcards, just like review of all the patterns you learned. Just a one quick example, which like that alone, just having the like 100 flashcards would be of value. But just to quickly run through what the chapters are, they are double attack, discovered attack and line clearances. That's one. That's another chapter. Skewers and pins, pinning bishop versus queen and knight battery. So that's a chapter name, but it already shows you what I'm talking about. Some of the names roll off the tongue, others less so. Elimination of the defense, trapping pieces, promotion, drawing weapons, defensive weapons, queen maneuvers in the weak F2, F7 point. That's chapter 10. And chapter 11, attacking weapons. So a lot of good stuff in there. And yeah, again, just amazing examples as we'll show in the YouTube video. So you went through the whole book and the whole workbook. Well, and then the workbook, you did the first 20 per pattern.
Yeah, I haven't made it through the whole workbook yet. I've actually been reading this since December and purposely trying to take it slow. So I'd like read a chapter, then do some from the workbook, really with the goal of cementing these patterns as deep as possible. I'm thinking about doing the Neil Bruce method and like buying a couple copies and cutting it up. But I think for now, I'm going to do it on Chessable because, like I said, the variations get so out of control so fast. I feel like trying to space repetition the book is really challenging. So I'm going to build my own copy of it on Chessable. Like I bought the course, but I'm just going to take the first example from each pattern and make like my own repeatable course just to try to get the patterns down.
That's a good idea. Yeah. And Kostya Kavutskiy did the presentation for the video on Chessable. He also has a short review of the book, which obviously he read in preparation for doing the presentation. Kostya is also a fan of the book and mentioned that they may be implementing it in their dojo cohort. I did see one comment on the Chessable course just lamenting a sort of the lack of exercises, which I guess makes sense, because the book is like canonical example and then 2 or 3 other examples, and that, as you said, may escalate very quickly in terms of degree of difficulty. So without having seen the Chessable course, I can see how that might be a bit frustrating in comparison to other Chessable courses, like I'm always a big advocate of the Checkmate Patterns Manual. I think it's amazing. And then it's really like introduction and then drill, drill, drill. So I haven't checked in. I don't know if the workbook is coming to Chessable, but it would probably be a good addition. And obviously what you're doing, making your own course, is a great idea, although that sounds like a lot of work, Kevin.
It does, but that's how good this book is, right? Like, I feel like if I can drill these 100 patterns and have them down, that's a big leg up.
Yeah, for sure.
I think a good name for the book is like 80 tactical patterns you must know, and then 20 other interesting ones.
80 tactical patterns you must know, plus filler.
Yeah. Like, my Chessable course I'm building for this is only going to have about 75 of the patterns. Like some of the, especially the stalemate chapter and the under promotion chapter, I was like, these are not ones you must know. These are ones you will see once a lifetime. That does not feel like must know category.
Yeah, not must know, but again, some really cool examples in there, including the Rampant Rook, as I already mentioned. So yeah,
I will say the Rampant Rook has already come up in a tournament game I've played. Like, that exact scenario has come up. I didn't call it the Rampant Rook at the time, but yeah, that came up.
That's funny because I've seen it here and there. I don't think I've ever had a Rampant Rook in a game, but I was very excited about it. And Kevin, speaking of your Chessable course, so before we wrap up this could be the shortest Perpetual Chess audio podcast ever. But again, we'll do a video that will probably be longer and show some positions. But so what's the deal with your Chessable course? Does it contain stuff that we must know, or is it just optional?
I would say it is must know, because instead of going for 100 patterns, I went for 6. And so I went for it's like almost the opposite of this book. It's like, here are 6 motifs. If you master these and you see them in all of your games, you will, win many, many more games. And so the course is called Turning Knowledge into Skill, because the point is, like, we know about pawn forks, but the point is, can you see them all? And so I kind of like do a learning science thing where I name them and then I tell a narrative about them. And then we see an easy version and then a harder version and then building up to one. And then I take all the motifs in a pile and you just drill them all in an unknown way. And then the last chapter is a calculation work where it's a blend of multiple patterns. And I brought former guests of the show, such as yourself, on to be guest solvers. And so people could see how other people are thinking. But the point is to take a smaller amount of material and try to really drill it deep so that it just pops out in our games.
Excellent. And what would you say? So we discussed the sort of vague target audience for 100 tactical patterns. What is the target audience for your course, Kevin?
Yeah, mine was much more specific. It's like on Chessable, it's called beginner and intermediate. I would say the people that will get the most out of it are people who have, say, read your everybody's first check workbook. They've learned the basic tactical motifs, so maybe they're at like 600 to 800. And then I'd say around like 1400, 1500 is when you'll get the most out of it. When I went through and solved all the courses for the video, I was still getting a lot out of it. I was like, all right, this is good. But it's definitely targeted at a lower audience than, say, 100 tactical patterns.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I'll link to Kevin's course. One other thing I wanted to add before we wrap up here on 100 tactical patterns is I read it digitally. So, normally I'd be like holding up the book, but I don't even have a paper copy of the book yet. But I read it on the new In Chess reader. Oh, there we go. Kevin's holding up the book. I read it on the workbook. Unbelievable. I read it on the new In Chess reader, and it was quite pleasant because there are enough variations where I would say that it strikes me in the physical book, it's like kind of the worst of both worlds, because you're going to go through a lot of work setting up the position. I mean, you could read it in bed, you could read it without a set and I think be okay. You just would be kind of glazing over some of the complex variations that Kevin mentioned. But otherwise, it's like the bad combination of like setting up a lot of positions and then kind of having quick resolution and having to go to the next one. Because the book is primarily introducing patterns rather than, again, the workbook is for solving, but the book is more like big overview. So I personally, I haven't had that good a look at the Chessable course, but I definitely enjoyed reading it on in the digital edition. So did you only do paper,
I
Kevin?
did, and I think that also highlights the differences in our experiences, right? So I'm laying in bed reading it, going, okay, here's a basic pattern, and then 2 examples later, I'm like, wait, I have to like visualize 12 moves deep of this position now. What is happening? I'm not that good.
Right. Yeah. So with the new in chess app, you can actually play through the moves, and often their books end up on Forward Chess too. I didn't check, but just search for the new in chess app, and then you can get the books through there. And obviously, we should say, new in chess did publish my book, but this is a unpaid endorsement as anything that I do book recap wise. This is just my honest opinion of the book,
Hey,
warts
Ben,
and all, although more good than bad for sure.
did you have any favorite chapters?
Oh man, yeah.
My favorite chapter was actually the first one, the double attacks. I mean, I thought it's what hooked me because I was like, wait, there's like 4 double attacks I don't know here. Like, how's that possible? I've gone through lots of tactics books. How is it possible that I'm seeing new patterns in something as basic as double attacks?
Yeah, yeah, no, and in a similar note, mine was skewers and pins because there's something about cross pins that are just so cool, where a piece is pinned in one direction and then another piece pins it in another, and therefore it looks like it can move. It's almost like an optical illusion. And he had some cool examples of that. I also enjoyed the under promotion chapter. Always a sucker for under promotion puzzles, even though those are the least practical.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. And the drawing weapons, there's some cool perpetual type stuff on brand for perpetual chess. But I think that pretty much covers it for book talk. So listeners who want to know more can check out the YouTube video, subscribe to the YouTube channel while you're at it. And those of you who make time for that, we will see you there. Otherwise, again, if you're rated over 1400, up to 2200, I would say this book is worth getting. Again, especially if you teach chess in any capacity, it's a must have. It's just to be able to give names to these patterns has immense values. 2 thumbs up from me, despite any quibbles, and sounds like 1.75 or something from you, Kevin.
I said 2 thumbs up. I mean, I feel like there's a sequel ready to be written, which is like 100 tactical patterns you must know for the club player. And it's
Right.
just like really focused on the more basic examples, and it gives New in Chess a great way to make a lot more money. Like, go for it, New in Chess. Make another version.
Okay. All right. Well, on that note, we'll say goodbye from here, and those interested can catch us on YouTube. Thank you, Kevin.
You're welcome.